Hey everybody, Jem Schofield here, and welcome to the 4K for 10K camera series. If you have not yet done so, please watch the overview video where I talk about the criteria for the 6 candidate cameras that we are featuring. I also want to mention that this series is not about doing a direct comparison between the cameras. It is not a video-based user manual for each of the cameras, nor in-depth reviews of the cameras that are featured. The whole purpose of this series is to help you figure out which camera or cameras that we are covering might be right for your productions. A camera series would not be complete without some test footage. So we decided that we were going to record to each of these cameras internally at their highest resolution and at the best formats and codecs that they could record to internally. So in this video, we're going to be talking about the Canon EOS C300 Mark II. So let's get started. Let's start by talking about the key components that are included with the C300 Mark II, and then we'll get into the camera from an operator's standpoint. So we of course have the camera body itself, which has a built-in electronic viewfinder, and we have a battery that's included with the camera, the BPA30, a relatively small battery overall. So what you'll want to do is you want to get probably an additional battery or two. These BPA60s will run this camera system for a long time, and one of the things that I really like about this camera is included with the camera system is a dual battery charger. So that's a great feature, and of course you have power for mains so that you can power it that way as well. We have over here the grip unit, which is not just for holding the camera, but also for additional functionality, which we'll talk about in a moment. We have this top handle, which has 1/4 taps. It has plenty of cold shoes. And then attached to that right now, we have this clamshell monitor unit, which doubles as both the monitoring device and also is where our XLR inputs are on the camera. And also this monitor unit, just so that you can see, has additional functionality. We have our audio controls over here, transport controls, additional assignable buttons, start, stop, record. We can navigate our menu systems from here. So it's a very versatile unit. Of course, it has the shock mount built in. And because it is so versatile, you don't have to mount it in just one place on the camera. We can quickly and easily put that into one of the other cold shoes on the camera if we want to, so we can mount this in different ways. So I'm just going to go ahead and put that into the way that I normally use it on the camera. Though depending on your shooting style, you may change that. And I do want to make one other note when we're just talking about the camera body itself. This is a Super 35mm 4K sensor, but the lens mount is actually capable of being bought in 2 different variations. You can buy it with the Canon EF mount, but you can also buy the camera in a PL mount, or positive locking mount, especially if you're using the camera in more traditional cine style setups. Now, that is not a user changeable mount. You will actually have to buy the camera one way or the other, or if you own the camera in one mount, you'd have to send it in. There is also one user upgrade where you can change the EF mount to a locking EF mount, and you can look into that as well if that makes sense for your style of shooting and you just need a more robust version of the EF mount for your productions. So I'm just going to go ahead and pop a lens onto this camera. This is actually the Cine Servo 18-80 from Canon, and this is a pretty interesting lens because it's allowing you to sort of have a hybrid lens that you can use with gears, but also you can attach and add a handle here and use this more in a traditional broadcast ENG style. And we're starting to see that trend with some of these camera systems. In fact, if you check out the Sony FS7 II video from this series, you'll see that Sony is also making lenses that are serving this purpose in the market, these sort of hybrid cine style, broadcast style lenses that you can use with these cameras. Now, what I want to do at this point is we're going to go over to the left side of the camera body and start to talk about this camera from a camera operator's standpoint. So the first thing you'll notice about the camera body itself is there are a lot of numbers on it, and there are numbers everywhere on the C300 Mark II. There are probably more assignable buttons on this camera than any of the other cameras in our series. But as with all of the other cameras, what we want to talk about first is this side of the camera, and we'll start with ND. You'll see here that from a camera operator standpoint, these assignable buttons have defaults which are pretty straightforward. Magnification, peaking, zebra, and waveform monitor, quick and easy access to shutter, ISO and gain, and also slow and fast frame rate. And these are all assignable to different functions inside of the menu system. And then we have one way of many on this camera system to access and get to things in terms of selecting and going through menu systems, and also an adjustment wheel here when you're changing things on the camera. Down here, transport controls, start, stop, record. And then up here, we can switch between camera or media, depending on how we're using the camera. From an operator standpoint, we would set it to camera. And then this little button right here, which I absolutely love, when we press that button, it toggles between lighting up the buttons on the camera body and having them unlit. And of course, you can see the advantage of that in terms of being in darker locations. In fact, when I press that button here, it also lights up this screen on the back of the camera, which gives us information about our camera settings and our audio levels, so that you don't just have to rely upon this monitor unit on the camera. In addition to the two CFast card slots here for your main recording on the camera system, on the front right of the camera there's actually an SD card slot, and that SD card slot will allow you to have proxy recording at a lower resolution for post workflows where that makes sense. And then going back to the rear of the camera system over here, we have all of our ports or terminals, and there are a lot of them on this camera body. As you can see here, we have Genlock sync, we have time code, which can be in and out. We have a MON terminal and a rec out terminal. And what's interesting about these is that they can both push out a full raw signal from the camera system. The MON terminal will allow you to have overlays when you're using an external monitor so that you can see those. The rec out is always going to be a clean signal from the camera system. We also have HDMI out. This is not HDMI 2.0 on this particular camera though, so you should be aware of that. So you're not using that for UHD monitoring and recording. And then of course you have your DC in for powering the camera from mains. When we go over to this side of the camera body, we have the grip itself, and unlike some of the other cameras in our series, this is not a quick release. So there's no quick release. You have to basically unscrew this, and then you have to put it into a different position, and then that will allow you to then screw it back in and lock it into that position for your grip. Now, there are some functions here. We have an assignable button here, which is by default for a focus guide, which is a really great feature, which we'll take a look at later on. We have our joystick control, which will also let you select, start, stop, record, and then our dial right here, which is generally used for changing our aperture or iris. Now, in terms of the ergonomics of this camera system, it's not any different than a lot of the other cameras in this series. There are a couple of cameras that are designed out of the box to get up onto your shoulder, but the rest of the cameras, the C300 Mark II included, are really well suited out of the box for handheld use, being up on sticks on a fluid head or on other camera stabilizers. But as soon as you want to get that camera onto your shoulder, you are going to have to look at shoulder mount kits so you can kit out the camera for that type of shooting. Now, the last thing I want to do is just get over here to the back of the camera so we can jump into our menus. This is our menu button here. There's also one up here on the monitor unit. So we'll dive into those and take a look at some of those key features in terms of how they relate to how you might be using this particular camera. So let's jump into the menus now. And the first thing we'll do is take a look at the camera setup menu, where we access a lot of the functions having to do with the C300 Mark II. And we're going to go ahead and take a look at this extended ND range option. So we just turn that on right here, and I'll step out of the menu, and we'll see that when we're activating our ND, there's our 2, our 4, and our 6 stops of ND. But now we have 2 additional stages of ND, and there we have up to 10 stops of ND. So that's the extended ND range, and now I'm going to jump into the focus menu. And at the moment, we're seeing almost all of our options grayed out, and that's just because my lens is set to manual focus. So I'll switch it over to AF or autofocus. And as you can see here, we have a tremendous amount of control and tons of parameters related to AF. The dual pixel CMOS AF system in the C300 Mark II and also one other camera in our series, the C200, is the most extensive and probably the most advanced of all of the cameras that we are talking about. And just to take you through some of these things here, we can change our AF mode. We can change our frame size. So we have a large frame size here, which is actually changeable in terms of location. I can go back into the menu and make that a smaller frame to be more precise in terms of where I'm getting focus and selecting focus. And then inside of here also, we can turn on face detection and tracking. And then we can decide things like, for instance, whether or not it's face priority or face only. Now, as with every AF system that you use on any of these cameras, it's not going to be 100%. For instance, I have a beard and I'm wearing glasses, and even the dual pixel CMOS AF system will have trouble with that at times. So you just have to try the system, figure out where it's working for you. It is very reliable in terms of this camera system and the C200, but you're not going to get perfect results 100% of the time. So now that the C200 is out, and we'll be taking a look at that as one of our other cameras in the series, you may be asking, what about touch AF or autofocus? Well, the good news is that you can use the LMV1, the monitor from the C200, on the C300 Mark II. You can also get the MA400, which is a separate audio unit, which will have your audio controls and your XLR inputs. So together, those can replace this clamshell, this monitor unit, for your productions, and you will have touch AF. Now, with our camera set to manual focus, we are going to talk about one other thing that is a focus assist feature on the C300 Mark II, and it's called Focus Guide. What you do by default is just go over to the grip and press assignable button number 1, though you can assign it to other buttons on the camera system. And when you do that, you will see this little box appear, and as you change your focus, it will tell you whether or not your image is in focus or out of focus. And as soon as you see those arrows come together and it turns green, then you know that you have tack sharp focus on that part of the image. Now let's back out of that menu and we're going to go down to the custom picture menu. And this is really where we tell the camera how we're setting it up in terms of our gamma and also our gamut settings. And so you can see there are a tremendous number of presets with very large color gamuts, cinema gamut being the largest, even larger than BT 2020, and also a variety of different log gammas that you can use inside of the camera. You can also on this camera turn that off, and if you go into your main settings, you can actually tweak this in terms of exactly the way you want it to be set, having to do with your gamma, your color space, and then also your color matrix, which really is that additional level of control depending on your color gamut in terms of the way your image is rendered from a chroma standpoint. So I'm just going to go ahead and leave that on production camera right now because I like that combination. And then you can even go inside of here and paint in camera depending on how you have the camera set up. So let's just go down here now to our recording media setup menu, and this is an important one to take a look at. And the first thing that we want to do is take a look at the fact that we can spit out a 4K raw signal from that rec out terminal on the camera system. And we also can decide what flag in terms of our color gamut is being sent over that signal. Is it going to be a 2020 gamut or a cinema gamut? And now we'll jump down to frame rate. And this is not the off-speed or high-speed king in terms of a camera system. This is really a workhorse camera, well suited for corporate documentary. But if you're trying to do high-speed stuff, this is not really the camera that you would probably go to, but you can see here that we can change our frame rates quickly and easily. And then in terms of our internal recording to the CFast cards, we can go all the way up to DCI 4K at a 10-bit 422 in terms of our chroma sampling. When we do that, we will get a little reset in the camera to switch it over to that. And we have high bit rates internally, over 400 megabits per second, so you do wind up with a rich image that you can do a lot with in post-production. And here's another thing, we can go in, and that SD card slot on the front right of the camera can record proxies. We can go in here and activate that, and we can even apply a LUT to that recording if we want to. So that's your proxy recording. We'll step out of there. We go into relay double slot recording. Now, not unique to this particular camera system, being able to record to 2 cards at the same time, but it should be noted that it is an important feature anytime a camera has it, especially in small to no crew production where you may not have a data wrangler to pull cards from your camera system. In addition, this particular camera can do 5 recordings at the same time. Recording to both CFast card slots. We have raw output from the record and MON terminals, and then we also can do that proxy recording to the SD card. So 5 different recording options all at the same time. Okay, let's go ahead and step out of that menu, and we're going to go down here to the assistance function menu. And one other thing that I want to show you inside of this particular menu, which is our LUT functionality on the C300 Mark II. Now, unlike a camera like the FS7 II, where you can actually load LUTs into the camera, you do have to use the LUTs that are built into the C300 Mark II. But I have to say that once you activate and route those, that there is a tremendous amount of functionality inside of here. To the LCD viewfinder options here, we can only push a Rec 709 or BT 709 LUT. And part of that has to do with the limitations of the actual displays themselves. But if we are pushing a signal out of the camera system to something other than this and this, then we have the ability, if we want to push out a DCI LUT, a 2020 LUT, or a 709 LUT. So tremendous amount of functionality there in terms of how you can push those signals out from the camera system, and will be really important going forward as far as our workflows, especially when we are shooting content for these displays with higher dynamic range, and in particular these wider color gamuts. So the last thing to go over here is the assignable buttons functionality in the camera system. As I've said before, there's probably more on this camera system than any of the other cameras in our series. We can go into the camera body and assign those buttons. We can go into the grip and assign that button, and then also the monitor unit, which is up here. And even if we have things like the EVF V70, which comes from the C700, the LMV1, which is the screen from the C200, which can be added to here, or the remote controller unit. So the ability for you to customize the C300 Mark II for your style of shooting is very extensive because of that function. And we'll go ahead and step out of there. And again, we have on this camera, like there is on the FS7 II, the ability to create your own personalized menu. And now I'm just going to go up here back to our recording media setup and show you how we had this camera set up for our test footage at AbelCine in New York. You can see here we had this set to a resolution of 4096 by 2160, so DCI 4K, 10-bit 422 being recorded internally to the CFast cards. So let's go ahead and take a look at that footage. Here are our 3 shooting scenarios that we are going to be showing you, and they are an interior low light example, an exterior example, and also a mixed lighting example. So our low light test was really, again, to do something where we were shooting in low light and pushing the sensor a little bit. Just a large soft key source. We had a little bit of light in the background. We wanted to make sure that there was some color in that image so that you could see how it reacts to that, but also to make sure that we had dynamic range in the frame. For our exterior, we wanted to simulate as close as we could bright daylight, but with high dynamic range throughout the image. We're not using any bounce cards. There's no negative fill. We're just using the light that is available to us in that space. And then for this scenario, we really wanted to make sure that we were kind of mimicking a typical situation where you might have some mixed lighting. We're using lots of practicals. There's obviously daylight coming into the space. And we also have a couple of fixtures that are playing here. The main one is our key light for our main talent in the foreground. And then there's a small light down there in the back left of the frame, which is just basically throwing a little bit of a pool of light into that shadowy area to lift it a little bit. And again, the goal was to show you and give you something with some real dynamic range to play with in the image. Here's our low light example with the C300 Mark II, and you can see the settings on how the camera was set up. Now we're taking a look at that footage without any information up on the screen. Do remember though, if you're watching it as part of this video, that this is heavily compressed, and we urge you to download the original files to see what this image actually has in it in terms of information. Now we're taking a look at that same picture, but with a Rec. 709 LUT applied, so you can get a sense of what that might look like in production if you had a viewing LUT up on a screen. Here's our exterior bright daylight setup and the settings that we had our camera set up to record internally. Here's that footage without any information on the screen, so you can see the whole frame and what that looks like with the camera system. And now we're taking a look at that same footage with a Rec. 709 LUT applied to it just for reference. Lastly, here's our mixed lighting setup for our test footage, and you can see our camera settings right here. Here's that frame without any information up on the screen, so you can get a sense of that dynamic range when we look at that log footage. And now we're taking a look at that footage with a Rec. 709 LUT applied to it just for reference. And we've got lots of color temperatures here and a lot going on in the frame, and that should give you a lot to work with when you download the original files from the camera and you start to play with those images. So the goal here, regardless of low light, exterior, or sort of a mixed lighting situation, was to show you a lot of dynamic range within each of these images. So we were exposing for middle gray to where we should have for each of those cameras, and that allowed us to make sure that we had proper exposure for you to start with your images. So there you have it. That is the Canon EOS C300 Mark II, and hopefully this video has helped you figure out a little bit more about the camera system and where it might fit into your productions. I do recommend that you download the sample footage that we shot at AbelCine in New York and check that out for this camera system. Load it up into your favorite NLE or color grading software so you can see what you can do with the footage. And also check out the other videos in this series and download that footage so you can check out those cameras as well. Thanks for watching.